Good evening and welcome back to ParaGhoul Paranormal, Discoveries from the Dark, the radio show where we dive into the shadows to see what lies beneath. I'm your host, Katie Kulpa, and today we're actually diving into the shadows of Saskatchewan's history to uncover a true crime mystery that has captivated our guests' attention. Joining us on this eerie journey into the past tonight is Melanie Cole, a true crime researcher and writer who delves deep into Saskatchewan's past to shed light on forgotten tales of intrigue and suspense. With a passion for uncovering untold stories, Melanie is here to share insights into a chilling mystery that still haunts the prairies to this day. Before we dive into the mysterious true crime case that she brought to share with us today, and we'll probably need to share with us over 2 episodes because there's a lot to cover, let's learn more about Melanie and her journey into the world of Saskatchewan's true crime history and storytelling. All right, so, can you introduce yourself to our listeners and tell us a bit about what inspired you to explore Saskatchewan's history for hidden mysteries and true crime?
Okay, so my name is Melanie Cole, and this all started during the pandemic, as most things do. I was researching things to write on my blog, and of course, I was thinking of trying to find fascinating topics, things that interest me. And while I don't personally believe in ghosts, I'm definitely fascinated by the idea and the possibility of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so on a whim, I just started Googling most haunted places in Saskatchewan because I thought, surely if a place is haunted, there has to be a good story there. Because
Good
in
point.
my mind, from my limited view on ghosts, a haunting can't happen accidentally. Ghosts don't just show up. If I'm going to suspend disbelief and pretend that to myself that ghosts are real, there has to be a reason they're there. So I started Googling, and it was really disappointing because a lot of them are just like, no, it's just haunted because it's old. So it's
Oh,
haunted. And I was like, well, that's my logical brain won't accept it. So I'm Googling and I'm reading articles, and I happened upon this story about the Kerrobert Courthouse that they believed it was haunted. A lot of people who go there experience weird sensations. They hear whispers, they hear footsteps. They just get a general sense of unease when they're in the main building in near the staircase. They would always hear people around the staircase. And the reason that the people who work at the Kerrobert Courthouse thought maybe it was haunted was because there was a skull that was kept in an evidence locker in the basement for a murder trial. And the skull was kept there until I believe 1996. But that was their reason, was that the skull of this murder victim was kept in the building, and that was who was haunting the building, or a reason for the haunting. And so that was really intriguing to me because I love true crime. I've loved true crime since I was way too young to be watching true crime, but was watching it anyway. Um, the kind of thing,
yep.
comes up on late night TV, and I was unsupervised. So of course I started watching it. Um, and so immediately my true crime brain goes, who is murdered? Why? Were they caught? What happened? I have to know all the details. And so their thing was that it was a murder from 1930 and that it was defended by John Diefenbaker. So I was like, okay, I've got a few facts, started Googling. But the only murder trial I could find that happened in the Kerrobert Courthouse in 1930 was 2 farmers got into a fight, and the other farmer had stabbed him, and he had died a few days later. So there was no mystery. They knew exactly who had stabbed him, and I'm like, and they wouldn't keep a skull for that he was stabbed in the torso.
Yep.
That's very weird. And so and it wasn't defended by John Diefenbaker either. And so I'm looking at it, as far as I could tell, no cases were defended by John Diefenbaker in that courthouse anywhere near that time. But I was like, okay, but let's look at just cases with John Diefenbaker. And so I was looking at that and still like nothing lined up, couldn't find anything. But it got me down this hole of starting to look at all these murders that had happened in my backyard because of course, as a true crime aficionado, I'm hearing about cases in the States or in big cities or metropolitan areas.
Yep.
But as it turns out, we have a very rich history of murder in our province. especially in the 1930s and the 20s, which was a time of a lot of turmoil and a lot of despair. And so there was a lot of gruesome things happening in our province that just nobody really knows about. And so I started writing about them on my blog, which eventually did lead to me solving the case of whose skull was kept in the Kerrobert Courthouse, which is the story I'm going to tell you today.
Yeah. Oh, that's exciting.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
Mhm.
Yes, I guess let us know more because yeah, I'm really
Yeah.
curious as to whose skull was it and how
Yes.
did it get there?
Yes. Let's dive in, shall we?
Yeah.
So our story takes us not in Kerrobert. It actually takes us to Beechy, Saskatchewan.
Oh.
So yeah. So nowhere near Kerrobert. It was in Beechy, Saskatchewan. And what happened was on December 10th, 1930, there was a show that was held in the town hall. And the show was for someone named Professor Henry Gladstone, who was a self-described mind reader and water diviner. He was a former vaudevillian performer, and on vaudeville, he had the stage name of Professor Memoria, the mental marvel.
Oh.
Yeah, so he was in Beechy performing. Everyone was very excited. It's the middle of December. Everyone's bored. It's cold. So a great big turnout comes to this hall. And Professor Henry Gladstone is his own kind of interesting character. He told reporters that he was born late at night with a caul over his face in Lancashire, England in 1888. They told people he was the seventh son of a seventh son and the direct descendant of the British Prime Minister, William Ewart Gladstone, the former British Prime Minister, William Ewart Gladstone. He was not. William Ewart Gladstone did have a seventh son, but that son didn't have any children. So most
Oh.
likely just a made up, to add to the mystique.
Yeah.
Um, it worked. Everyone was very enthralled. He had a great act. And part of his act was that he would ask members of the audience to just pose questions to him in his mind, and he would answer them without them having to say anything at all. That was his shtick, was ask me a question, don't say anything out loud, and I'll answer you. And so at one point during this part of the performance, he points at a man named William Taylor, and he says, "The man you're thinking of was murdered. There was foul play, and the body will soon be found."
Ooh.
So the crowd the goosebumps go, everyone starts whispering and freaking out. And William Taylor admits he was thinking of a man named James S. McLaughlin, known as Scotty in the district. Scotty had left for supposedly BC in January of 1928, but no one had heard from him since. And he'd left all his livestock, he'd left his belongings. Apparently all he'd taken with him was just like a backpack, kind of a knapsack thing. And that was it. He'd left and no one had heard from him. And everyone was very suspicious, but there was no idea, like no one knew what happened to him. And so according to Henry Gladstone in his performance, the man was murdered and the body would soon be found. So this causes a ruckus. And he turns and he points to another man in the audience, a man named Constable Charles Carey. And he says to him, "And you'll be with me when I find the body." So now the audience is really in an uproar. One, that he picked out the cop in the audience,
Yeah.
but because now everyone is going wild because there's so many rumors. And so Constable Carey was actually the head of the detachment in Beechy, and he'd been the one looking into Scotty McLaughlin's disappearance. He'd started looking, but I think the disappearance kind of became serious in December of 1928, which is when he started his investigation. And he hadn't given up. He'd actually even just that October reached out to one of his superiors to ask for help because he was positive if they sent in another police officer to ask some questions, someone was going to slip up, he was going to get a new piece of evidence, and he was going to break this case. So when this performer calls out this murder in the audience, he's going, okay, here's my opportunity. People are shook up, they're going to talk like crazy, and somebody is going to get nervous. So he was very excited. So he called his superiors again to be like, hey, can you please send me some help? But they'd actually already agreed on his request, so they had someone already en route to Beechy. So on December 12th, Detective Corporal William Woods was sent out to help him, and he met him in Lucky Lake and told him about the show and this performance. And Henry Gladstone was actually performing in Lucky Lake that night. So he's like, let's go see the show, we'll interview him, which they did. And they decided, we don't have anything to lose here. What if we just invite him to come along on these interviews? Because people are going to think he's psychic. He's going to hear what they're thinking, and maybe someone will shake up and we'll get some truth out of this. They'll get nervous, they're going to slip up because he's there. Gladstone was happy to help. He loved attention and he loved adding to his prestige, right? So he apparently, and I couldn't verify, but he had apparently helped with missing persons before, with missing bodies before. The one I could, he said he had found 120 bodies lost to water in Canada. The one I could confirm was he did in 1924 correctly predict where they'd find the missing body of a man named, I can't remember his name, but it was a missing miner in Red Deer River, Alberta.
Oh.
And he predicted he would be found in this swirling eddy downriver from a railway bridge, which he was.
Okay.
And so according to him, he could help find any body lost to water. He could predict it, because what he would do is he would take like a piece of limestone and stick it in bread and throw it in the water and then watch where it went. So more science than psychic, but I'm thinking he used it to follow the current, like it probably went down there.
To understand currents kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. But he claimed it was psychic, of course, but that's how he found it. So he was confident that McLaughlin's body was going to be found on his old farm. He wanted to go there. He wanted to walk around. He wanted to see if he got anything of what he called his hunches. He wanted to see if he got a hunch while he was on the property, because he was pretty sure. He's like, I think it's going to be on his old farm. So Scotty was about in his, I believe, his mid-40s when he disappeared. He didn't really have any family in the district. He had moved there in 1914. And six years later, his wife died. And he had 2 children, but they were, I don't know if he gave them up or they were taken away, but they became wards of another family that lived in Herbert. So he was pretty much on his own. In 1926, he lost his farm to a tax sale. And another resident of the district named Olaf Evian bought his farm and then rented it to him with the idea that he would eventually buy it back.
Oh, okay.
But in 1927, Scotty took on a partner named John Schumacher that he invited onto his farm and started farming with him. And John Schumacher still lived out on that farm and still worked that farm. So that was kind of their number one, like, this is probably the last person to see him alive, aka probably our number one suspect.
Right.
So the next day, December 13th, they headed out and they visited a few farms. Nobody was there. Everyone's out. But they ended up on the farm of a man named Ernest, and I'm going to butcher his name here because I can't do names, but his name is Ernest Heigmeister, is how I'm pronouncing it. Heigmeister. You'd think I have a little German roots, but I cannot pronounce names anyway.
Probably better than me.
Exactly. But so they were going there because when Kerry was doing his initial investigation, some people had told him that Ernest had said that John Schumacher had threatened Scotty, had said that he was going to kill him to Ernest.
Oh.
Ernest flat out denied this. He's like, nope, never said that, never told nobody that. But he didn't believe him. He thought maybe he had made those threats. So that was the first place where they actually found someone at home that they could interview. So they started interviewing him. Detective Corporal Woods is talking to him, and he's still just flat out denying it. Nope, never said that. And then at some point, Gladstone just interrupts the interrogation and says, I'll tell you exactly what his words were on that occasion. And can I swear here?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. On that occasion, he said, I'll kill that Scotch bitch before he leaves the place. And he's like, and you had pneumonia at the time. Well, Ernest kind of hedges for a while, like, I don't know. And then eventually breaks down. He's like, yeah, he did say that. And I didn't have pneumonia at the time, but I had a really bad cold and I was worried it was pneumonia. That's so weird. Like, yeah, I did think I had pneumonia at this time when he made this threat. So now Detective Corporal Woods and Constable Carey are obviously very surprised at this new prediction. They never knew what anyone had said. They just knew that a threat had been uttered. So they're feeling way more confident now about choosing to include him in their investigation. And so now they decide they're going to head over to what is now called the Schumacher farm, Scotty's old farm.
Right.
So they leave Constable Carey on the road because he was in his uniform. The other 2 were in plainclothes, and they were like, we're going to go ahead. And they decided to say that they were water diviners. And so because they didn't have any evidence on John yet. They didn't want to spook him, but they wanted to have a look around. So they come to his farm, they go to the door, and they actually ask for the neighbors. They pretend they were lost, they're on the wrong farm. But it was his hired man was home, his brother-in-law was home. And so he explains, hey, we're water diviners. Like, if you want, we can take a look around the property and let you know if we find any water. And he's like, yeah, sure, go ahead. So they start wandering around, and Gladstone kind of leads them to the barn and then away, and then to the barn and then away. And then he comes back to the barn. And as they came back to the barn the third time, he starts like sniffing the air really loud. And he's like, something smells really weird. And the other guy's like, you're crazy. I can't smell anything. My nose is just as good as yours. Like, what are you talking about? And he's like, something strange. And then the hired man walked up, so he shut up, and they kind of wandered around and they visit, and they go and they leave, and they go back and pick up Constable Carey. And as soon as they do, Gladstone tells them there's been trouble there for Scotty, that he's been killed at the barn, and he's either buried somewhere nearby or under the floorboards. He's absolutely adamant he's either been killed in the barn or he's buried under the floorboards in the barn. He's positive. And Woods and Carey, they kind of think, well, like, chances are he probably burned the body if he'd murdered him. But he's like, no, he's not burned. He's buried. He's nearby. I guarantee it. He's either in that barn or he's somewhere nearby near an old well. So now they go and they do a few more interviews. They check back at the Schumacher farm. John's still not back. But as they're driving back to Beechy, they run into this old Ford truck, and it's got no lights on. And Carey's just like, that's got to be John. It's got to be John heading out. So he turns around, pulls them over, and sure enough, John is in the truck. So they call John out, and they ask him if he'll come into Beechy and just answer a few questions. So Detective Corporal Woods tells him, like, hey, I've been brought in because I'm going to make a very thorough investigation into this disappearance. We've already been to your farm twice. We gave it a real good look over, just so you know. And we're going to start our questions with you, because since obviously you're the last person to see him alive. So John, obviously super nervous. He's stuttering. He's kind of, like, very visibly nervous, but it's like, yeah, of course, I'll come answer your questions, no problem. So they take him into Beechy, into the detachment office, and they sit him down. And Henry Gladstone just kind of back in the corner, tries to hang back, and Detective Corporal Woods takes over the interrogation. He points out, like, hey, we got someone who says that you said you were going to kill Scotty. We know that you sold a bunch of his stuff after he left. And we know for a fact that you burned a pair of his false teeth. Someone had witnessed him burning a pair of his false teeth. And still nothing. John's not cracking. He's just giving really vague answers, like, no, everything's fine. I don't, no, we're good. He left, and, he told them, like, because Constable Carey had interviewed him when he first went missing. And the story was that Olaf Evian had decided to terminate his lease because Scotty just wasn't getting anything out of the farm. He was losing money. But when John started on the farm, he was able to actually get something out of the property. And so Olaf wanted Scotty gone, and he offered the new lease to John, which Olaf had told him was true. He had sent a letter. He had decided he didn't want Scotty on the land anymore. It was just not working. So John had told Carey, like, this happened. Scotty was obviously pissed. We fought. We got over it. I bought his stuff from him, and he left. He talked all the time about going to BC. I think that's where he went, but he didn't tell me. I don't know, but he's gone. And at the time, there's nothing else, like, there's no evidence, nothing to do. So, okay, so things go. So now we're back. We're talking to him. Detective Corporal Woods is interrogating him, and he's giving these vague answers. Nothing. He's not willing to talk. He's giving, like, I don't know. He left. I think he's in BC, but I don't know. So then our good friend Gladstone steps up. He jumps up. He snaps his fingers, and he goes, the barn. Yes, I've got it. Now, gentlemen, I'm going to tell you what happened out there. And he goes on to say that Scotty went to the barn, a blow was struck, and he was killed. It was murder. And that the body was buried. It's still there, and someplace near an old well. So now things get real quiet. It's silence. No one says a word. Not Woods, not Carey, not Gladstone, and definitely not John. It is just straight silence. And it's silent for so long that Constable Carey goes, and he gets a piece of paper and a pencil, and he's like, hey, John, obviously we can't make you tell us anything. But if you want to, here's a pencil and a paper. Again, it's still really quiet. No one says anything. And then John starts to sniffle, and then he starts to sob.
Oh no.
And he breaks down sobbing, and he's just like, oh, my wife and my baby, are they going to hang me? And they're like, I don't know. You have to tell us what happened. If you like, we can't say. We don't know what happened. You know what happened. So ask him, like, do you want to tell us? And he sobbed and he goes, yeah, I'll tell you. I'll tell everything. And so Gladstone leaves and they take his statement. And basically what he says is that he was pretty sure it was morning, that he had been eating breakfast, but Scotty had come home. They said good morning. And then he had gone out to the barn and he had started, what's the word? He started moving the manure pile. He had his pitchfork and he was moving the manure.
Okay.
And Scotty had come into the barn and started just unleashing verbal abuse on him, just calling him down, calling him names, just started fighting with him. And eventually he picked up a shovel and he swung it at John, and John, still holding the pitchfork, had swung and hit him in the head with it. And Scotty dropped and he did not get back up. So John was about, I don't even know if he was 20 at the time that this happened. He would have been 19, 20. So he fully panics. He runs to the house. He's there. He's panicking. He goes back. He shakes Scotty. Nothing. Scotty's just, it's done. It's gone. No one has seen the fight, he says. No one knows that there was, like, it just, so he dragged him out of the barn down to the manure pile by the old well, covered him in manure, and just left him. Tried not to touch him. He said that he tried not to touch him as much as humanly possible. Like, he was truly horrified. Buries him in the manure and then continues to live on the farm, because if he leaves, someone might find the body. If he goes, someone might think that he did something. So he was too scared to go and super scared to stay. Like, he kept like a string of like hired hands on at the farm. He hated being alone out there. And then he eventually got married and had his wife and baby on the farm with him, but he stayed. And so they read him his rights, they arrest him, take a statement, and they put him in a jail cell for the night. And they said he slept like a baby. So I imagine it just unburdening himself finally. So the next day, on December 14th, they go out to the Schumacher farm and he points out where the manure pile should be under all the snow. So they take him to the house, they leave him in custody with somebody, and then like a whole group of volunteers came out to dig up this body. And of course, like tons of people showed up just to watch, right?
Sure,
Because this is huge news in the community. So they had a bunch of volunteers, and like they are pickaxing and shoveling through frozen, about 1.5 feet of ice and snow just to get down to the manure pile. And then they had to start picking at the manure, and they're not finding anything. So they go back to the house and like, John, like, can you show us where, like, this, we can't find. He's like, please don't make me go and face those people. Like, please don't make me. So like, all right, we'll keep looking. And at this point, his brother-in-law had come and confronted him and like, is it true? Did you do this thing? And he's like, I mean, I guess it is. And he's like, well, how the hell did you stay here this whole time? And he's like, it was hard.
Oh, yeah.
So they go back out. And they're still digging in the manure. Like another 10, 20 minutes go by and they come back and they're like, John, like, we cannot find this body. You have to come show us. So he comes down and he's like, no, you're in the right spot. Like, if you keep digging, you will find him. And then it was not long after that, they're digging. They see a piece of sock start to come out. And then, so now they slow down. Now they're digging with their hands. They're trying to be really careful because, especially according to John's story, he had hit him in the head. So Constable Kerr was like, we have to be so careful. No injuries can happen to his head. This is all evidence. So they're all scraping away at this manure, and more of his clothes are coming out. And one of the men says like, oh yeah, this is Scotty, because Scotty wore really very distinctive pants. He had these like weird lace-up pants. No one else in the district wore these weird pants. And the way he wore them, he would tuck his socks over the cuffs of his pants. So they're like, this is Scotty. We've got him. So they're digging around the area where the head should be, because they don't want to do any injuries, and eventually like get the manure to give way, and literally the head comes off the body in the manure because it's frozen in the manure. And there's not much left. Like, it's pretty much bones, except for on the back of him there was still some flesh in that, and most of the wool clothing was all still there. It was pretty well preserved, but anything cotton had completely disintegrated. So they get him on a big door, and they take him carefully into town. And the post-mortem examination gets done, and basically, it was almost the left side of his head was almost caved in. Like there were so many breakages. Like the man who did the post-mortem, Dr. Lindsay, he said he'd never seen a worse broken skull, except for when he'd seen like shell bombs go off during World War One. Yeah, so it was a massive injury to his head. Like obviously he was dead immediately.
Yeah.
And he also had a fracture to his first rib on the left side, which, according to John, it was one blow. And his defense attorney eventually said, like, he was pretty sure like one piece of the pitchfork hit him in the head, and then maybe one of the prongs hit, and that's why that broke. But it was one blow, according to him. But John was 6'4". He was over 200 pounds. Like he was a big boy. He was a big guy. So when he swung, and according to him, he was in fear of his life, it was with a lot of power.
With everything behind it.
Yeah, exactly. Because the thing was, Scotty, it kind of depended on who you talked to, because as it came out in the like coroner's inquest and the preliminary hearing, and then eventually in the trial, it kind of went one way or the other with Scotty. Some people said, no, he was the nicest guy in the world. Everyone, like, he never had a temper. He was really nice. And other people were like, oh, but when he had a drink in him, he could be quarrelsome. So it kind of depended.
Unfortunately, I'm going to have to cut Melanie off there, as that's all the time we have for today. It's so hard to stop in the middle of something like this, but Melanie will be back on next week. Like I said, I had a feeling we'd run over to 2. So she'll continue telling us the rest of the story behind Scotty McLaughlin. I can't wait to find out what happened next. Thank you for joining us tonight, and don't forget, if you'd like to support the show, you can find me on most social media platforms under KDKULPA. I also have a Patreon for those that want behind-the-scenes information, extra content, and a chance to join a live Q&A with me each month. Stay tuned for our upcoming episodes, where we'll uncover more secrets, unravel more mysteries, and delve deeper into the shadows. Until then, remember to keep your flashlight handy and digital recorders ready. This is KD Kulpa signing off. Until next time, my ghouls.